And it took a few months, but in January I went back to work and resigned and started at Ray of Hope in February, middle of February of 2008. So it's been, 8+ years. It's the longest I've ever held a job, to be honest. Not all my fault, but and it's been an interesting experience because for me, I knew what I was getting into because of serving on the board, but I didn't know, right? And for me, the real challenge was the very first week at work. I was okay with the youth things because I'd raised 4 kids. One of them had been real challenging and stole thousands of dollars out of a bank account, and I was smashing bongs and throwing them in the garbage. And this is a young kid that at 16 left the house and wasn't, he just couch surfed around Upper Beechwood and Colonial Acres. And, we'd have parents phone us and go, oh, just want you to know where, your son is. He's staying with us. And you're going, that's really not helpful. But he's such a nice kid. He does the dishes. He talks to us. He cleans up after himself. He's nicer than my own son. For you, I'm sure he is. So I'd been through that part. We'd been through that part as a family. So I kind of understood the dynamics of the substance abuse and, potential criminal behavior. I knew nothing about downtown people. I knew nothing about people living in poverty because I grew up in the suburbs of Toronto. I lived in Upper Beechwood. And I'll tell you, I've been to Rwanda twice. And there's as much cultural disparity between Upper Beechwood and downtown Kitchener as there is between Canada and Rwanda. For most of us. We're not familiar with poverty. And so we've lived with our perceptions of what the people on the street are like. And many of them, if you talk to some people, it's, they're just lazy, they need to get a job, and all of those things. They're just, if I give them $5, they're just going to go spend it on booze, maybe. So I felt I'm going to be the CEO at Ray of Hope. I got to get beyond my thoughts, who I think these people are, and actually get down to meet them. So my first Thursday when they ran the food hampers, and the only afternoon time that we were open serving a meal, I determined I was going to go to our community center every Thursday just to be there, to learn. And so John Hill, who's our program director, gave me a great job. He said, here, you hold the roll of tickets, and everyone that comes in for a meal, you give them a ticket so they can eat, and then when their number's called, they can go up to the food hamper. So I started to, hand out tickets, and I got to smile at people and, meet people as they were coming in. And the very first day, something happened to me that just made it really crystal clear, the differences that I was going to have to wrap my head around. I had a black guy come up to me and asked to borrow my pen. And I instinctively reached into my jacket. Oh, sorry about this. I reached into my jacket to pull out my pen. And I paused for a moment because my hand landed on the pen I'd bought myself when I'd graduated from Laurier with my MBA and gotten my first management job. And I'd spent $85 for a pen. And here's some black guy who I don't know from Adam asking me to borrow it. And so in that instant, so much goes through your mind, but you don't think you're pausing that long. But I did reach in and I pulled out my pen. And I took the pen and I pulled the cap off, thinking, okay, you can take the pen. If I never see it again, at least I have the cap. No, I honestly did this. I'll at least keep the cap, and that will still be the emotional attachment to what I'd achieved, was still the value in the pen. $85 was a lot at the time too, but the value for me was in the cap of the pen. So I gave him the pen, and then I watched him. Now, our Oasis facility was probably about 3 times the floor space of this living dining room kitchen area. So it was a big room, but not that big room. But I watched him like a hawk walk across the room because I was really hoping I'd get my pen back, but I was trusting I might not. So, he goes over and he grabs a piece of paper, and I'm listening, and he writes down a phone number, and he goes to this woman. He goes, here, I know you're looking for a new place to live. I saw this place advertised walking down today. Here, give them a call. And then he walked back and gave me my pen. And I said, thank you, and I put it back in my pocket. You know what my lesson was I learned? Always carry a cheap pen. And now we put Ray of Hope on them so we want to give them away. No, I think you know the lesson was I was such an ass, right? Because I was thinking about my $85 pen. This guy cared about somebody. And really that's what goes on. I had the pleasant experience last week of taking our new staff from Welcome Home around Ray of Hope to tour all of our facilities and meet with staff and just see what they've gotten themselves into, right? Because it's not just about refugees, it's about all these other things. And so as we ended up at the cafe and I was buying them lunch at Hefner's and we got talking, okay, so what did you see there? What's the common thread? And it came down to this, relationship. No matter what you're doing, you're trying to build relationships. You're trying to bring people together to help one another. And so how am I doing for time? So when we talk about neighbors, right, we can think about, you're a close group of neighbors. You live close together. When John first asked me about this, I'm going, how am I going to talk about this? Well, I think about neighbors on TV, right? You go back to Bewitched. Do you remember Bewitched? Mrs. Kravitz, right? Abner, right? She knew something was going on at that house, could never figure it out, but she was the nosy neighbor looking over the fence, trying to figure out, peering through the windows, because she knew there was something weird going on, and she needed to figure it out and get it right. There's Home Improvement with Wilson, right? The guy on the other side of the fence who you never see anything other than his eyes or the hat, or you maybe not even see, you just hear this voice with all this wisdom that kind of pours out. Different type of neighbor. The Jeffersons, right, was a classic of all these black people, this family that made it, right, in the dry cleaning business, and they moving on up, right? They'd gone into a neighborhood where they just didn't fit, and the whole dynamics of that story was somewhat humorous. I'm sure you've all got neighbor stories. I had a new neighbor story this morning. I'm walking out my front door, and my neighbor next door, who is from the Middle East, teaches at the university in engineering, U of W. Lovely family. They're getting their roof done. And I had talked to them a few weeks ago about the guy that had done our roof, and were we happy with it? Yeah, we really were. So, there's some banging going on the roof in the morning, and I look out, and yeah, there's the bin in the driveway, and they're starting in on their roof, and that's great. And the bylaw officer drives up and stops, and I see him walk up to the house. I'm going, what on earth is going on? Now, I was going to Zaire's to get cough medicine, so I didn't hang around, but when I came back, I had to ask the roofers, what was the bylaw officer about? Neighbor complained about my car being parked here for more than 3 hours yesterday. Really? Well, yeah, it's against the bylaw. You're only allowed to park up to 3 hours on the street. So even though you couldn't park in the driveway because there's a bin there, and you had a neighbor that was his duty. So we had those experiences. When we lived in Toronto, lovely family next door. Gus was a chef, Greek. English wasn't that great, but lovely family. And their son got a great job driving a tractor trailer, and he thought it was fine that he could park it overnight between our houses and start up at 6 a.m. to go off to work. You know what? We had that. You guys need to be good neighbors, right? That's you know what? You can't park those vehicles in a residential neighborhood. So we have bylaws to help us be good neighbors, and we know good fences make good neighbors, right? There's some point of it's good to see you, but this is my property, and have you ever borrowed something from your neighbor and lost it or broke it? I mean, it's challenging being neighbors with people we're familiar with, right? When they're people that have the same culture and even, kind of basic socioeconomic, I even found it, part of our youth addictions program was we had a group of philanthropists in the community that donated 3 acres of land to us. And they gave us about $1.9 million in cash to buy this land and to do some stuff. And I had to deal with these guys. It's intimidating when you're sitting in a room full of millionaires. And you really get the sense of they're pretty sure they're smarter than you are, right? Now they never said it outright, but you really got the sense of this is, we've got the money, so we know how these things work, and we'll figure it all out and make it happen. We get in situations, and it's not all about color, it's not all about culture, it's not about race, it's not about religion, but we're not comfortable with the unfamiliar. And so that's one of the biggest challenges I think we face as a community, is to get beyond the familiar and put ourselves into situations where we might feel a little uncomfortable. And Ray of Hope really works at inviting volunteers to come down and embrace the community, to get involved in serving meals, or to sit and play cribbage with somebody while we're in just a drop-in, or to go out and play sports with youth in a custody facility. Help them see that there's other exposures in life than what they've been accustomed to, that's gotten them to where they're at. So really at the heart, that's what we're about. And so I think as a community, there's lots of things that go on. So if you look at the KW Community Foundation, their real focus on raising and sharing money around the community is around an issue they call belonging. Wanting to people feel that, I belong here. And whether it's the person that's struggling with mental health issues, or whether it's the person that's just landed from another country and is a refugee claimant, doesn't speak a word of English, and is going to try. And we have a lot of people come to KW because we're known as a community that embraces people. It's a giving community, and it's maybe some of those old Mennonite, German, Lutheran roots that we have that still are very much part of the fabric of KW, and we see it all the time. And so we're just one agency in the city that's doing a piece to build community and to engage people and to provide support. But there's so many others. You have House of Friendship that's been around for 75 years. You've got the Working Center that's been around since just after, so 40 some odd years. There's a lot of people, and we really try to work collaboratively and collectively so that we're not duplicating services, or that we can work together with individuals to provide support, or just even as a community to create a network of support for people. And so there's lots of things going on that way. Kitchener as a city has a real focus on communities and building community, and they have community centers, which is, we don't have that in Waterloo, to be honest. And it's really interesting just to see the different pieces of it. So that's kind of a bit of who I am. I'm trying to be a neighbor to people that, for the most part, I didn't know. And I'll just tell the story about, one of the other things that really cemented it for me. There's two things. One is I met a gentleman named Bill. And we have Bill's picture that was taken when he got his 25-year service award from the Record. Bill's now worked for the Record for 34 years as a paperboy. Now, most of us give up our paper routes at 14, 15 and get a real job. But Bill, that's what he's capable of doing. But this is a hardworking guy who gets up at 6 every morning to go out and deliver the 100 papers before 7. He probably gets up earlier than that. But he lives in a rent-geared-to-income apartment with House of Friendship. He comes down to our place to play cribbage, engage with people, and have a meal. And our community's filled with people like Bill. Yeah, there's the chronic alcoholics, there's violent people, but everyone is an individual with an individual story. And you only get to know that when you meet them. When you break down that barrier of, I'm just looking at them and making perceptions, and decisions, and as opposed to, I'm willing to go and meet them and talk to them and hear their story. And so, that's one of the things we really try to do, is share those stories with people. So thank you for your time this morning, I hope, this afternoon. Yeah, I've been taking Tylenol, ibuprofen, and Benadryl, and so I might not share. So I hope I've given you something to stimulate a conversation about what's it really mean to live in community and to be a neighbor? Not only just in the context of over my fence, but in the context of I live in a broader community, and the globe is shrinking, right? Life is changing for us, right? And it's because, you know, technology has shrunk the world, transportation has shrunk the world, right? Before, when there was war-torn situations, you know, hundreds of years ago, well, people just died, they had nowhere to go. They could flee so far, but then, you know, they couldn't get on a plane and try and come to the States or come to Canada or get to Europe, or get on a boat in the Mediterranean and try to get across to Greece or Italy, right? Life's changing. There's, I think, something like 53 million refugees right now displaced in the world, and they're displaced by war. You know, so they would prefer to be at home. They'd prefer to still live in the house that used to be there, but it's been bombed and blown up. So I know, you know, listening to all the rhetoric around the U.S. election over the last few weeks, right? Listening to even some of the rhetoric locally, it's, you know, there's no simple answers. Yeah, there's always going to be challenges, and we're going to face a different world, different situations. But I think we're called to do that, right? We're called to live generously within the world, let alone just within our community. Because you think of yourself, when have you felt closest to your neighbors? It's probably when somebody's been sick and they heard about that and brought some soup, right? When you've had some, that's when we tend to be most neighborly, is when, oh, I know somebody needs something and I can help. We need to kind of have that same spirit of generosity with our larger community as well.
Great.